The insult cracked across the arena like a whip. Chuck Norris is a museum piece. Time to take him off the wall and prove he's lost whatever strength he once had. The house mics caught it clean. The syllables ricocheted upward, rattling through steel beams and echoing down into the crowd. For a second, one impossible, stretched-out second, the entire place froze. The hum of the lights, the faint hiss of speakers, a cough from somewhere up in the rafters. That was all. Then the crowd tore open. Half the arena exploded in laughter, the kind that stings more than any punch. Hands slapped together, whistles pierced the air, a handful of fans doubled over in their seats. The other half surged to their feet, their roar thick with disbelief and rage. "No way!" voices broke out, layered over curses and shouts of protest. The split wasn't neat. It was jagged, uneven, alive. The sound became a storm, colliding in the rafters, crashing back down. Steven Seagal stood dead center in the ring, unmoved. His lips curled into a smirk that looked carved into his face. He lifted his chin slightly, closing his eyes for a moment, as if he were tasting the chaos. To him, the insults, the fury, even the disgust weren't threats. They were food. Each howl seemed to sink into him, straightening his back, puffing his chest. The angrier they got, the calmer he became. The lights above drilled white heat into the ring, bleaching the canvas into a square of bone. Beyond the ropes, the crowd blurred into a restless ocean. Phones bobbed like stars, red recording lights flashing, camera bulbs bursting white every few seconds. The arena smelled of beer and sweat, of rubber from the cables taped to the floor, of hot metal from the lamps overhead. It was alive, heavy, a single organism with too many voices. Seagal let the silence linger just long enough to feel deliberate. Then he lifted the mic again, slow, savoring. "You think he's still what he used to be?" His voice was sharp now, honed to a point. "That's nostalgia." His power now lives only in memes and old campfire stories. Legends are bedtime tales told by people too afraid to face reality. The laughter side roared again, pounding their feet against the concrete. Plastic beer cups rattled in cup holders, sloshing amber liquid onto the floor. But the other side ignited too. Red faces, clenched fists, voices breaking as they screamed back. In the lower seats, a man in a faded Walker, Texas Ranger t-shirt stood, his face flushed, eyes glassy. "Say that to his face," he shouted, his voice shredding itself on the words. Cameras swung toward him, zoomed in, and his pain was broadcast to millions. He wasn't just angry, he looked betrayed, as though Seagal hadn't insulted a man, but his own childhood. Seagal caught him. He cupped a hand to his ear, feigning deafness, a smirk twisting wider. "What's that? Say it again?" He leaned toward the mic until his breath hissed across it. "He's finished. And I'll show you what happens when a relic dares to step into the present." A plastic cup spun down from the balcony, beer trailing behind it. It smacked the mat near Seagal's boot, bursting with a flat thud. He glanced at it, lips tightening, then nudged it aside with the edge of his shoe. The cameras caught the disdain in his expression, replaying it on the giant screen above the ring. The building trembled with noise. The believers screamed for Chuck. The mockers screamed for more blood. The clash of voices was deafening, the arena shaking under the force of its own divided heartbeat. And still, Chuck Norris did not appear. The absence was becoming unbearable. With every second, it grew heavier, stretching across the ring like a shadow. People craned their necks toward the tunnel, eyes straining into the black rectangle where he was expected. Phones lifted higher, Someone whispered, "Where is he?" And it spread like a nervous echo. Seagal started pacing the ring, heel to toe, slow, unhurried. He looked out into the crowd, mocking their desperation with each step. "Look at you," he said, gesturing lazily with the microphone. "Clinging to a ghost. Worshipping a man who hasn't proven anything in decades. Your hero lives only in grainy clips and bad jokes." He paused, letting the silence hang just long enough to sting. "You call that strength?" Then he laughed. It wasn't a laugh meant to amuse. It was sharp, guttural, cruel. The speakers gave it too much volume, making it feel like it was crawling under the audience's skin. The laughter echoed around the rafters, twisted into something uglier than sound. The believers screamed louder, some with tears in their eyes, fists hammering against the railings. Others sank into their seats, hands pressed together in prayer. They wanted proof. They wanted him. But he wasn't there. Not yet. Seagal's calm grew unbearable. He closed his eyes again, breathing slow, drawing the chaos into himself like oxygen. The more the crowd fought him, the stronger he looked. He didn't need to win. He only needed to wait. Then, flicker. The lights overhead twitched just for an instant, enough to cut through the roar. A chant died in mid-syllable. Gasps darted through the stands like sparks. The crowd turned its face upward, thousands of eyes tracking the quiver of the lamps. Seagal lifted the mic again, his timing surgical. His words dropped like stone. "Bring out your cowboy. Let's bury him tonight." The sentence landed with finality, slicing through noise, leaving nothing but a hard, stinging silence. For the first time, even the laughers faltered. It wasn't a joke anymore. It sounded like a sentence passed. But the tunnel stayed black. The crowd leaned forward, breath caught in their chests. The absence of Chuck was no longer suspense. It was cruelty. And Seagal smiled, because he knew it. Just wondering, where are you watching from? Write it down, Bellow. The jeers were still swelling when the arena plunged into darkness. Not dimmed, snuffed. Every bulb above the ring died in the same breath. Screens blacked out. The giant monitors flickered once and went blank. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to collapse inward. The air pulled tight against the chest of every person in the building. In that silence, the crowd became one organism, startled, breathless, waiting. No music, no announcement, just the sudden, absolute void. Then, from that blackness, a single chord ripped through the speakers. One raw guitar strike, sharp as a blade drawn from its sheath. It hit like lightning, rattling the bleachers, making plastic cups jump in their holders. Gasps erupted, then cheers, then screams. Phones lit up the stands as people tried to catch what their eyes couldn't see. From the tunnel, a shape emerged. He wasn't dressed for theater. No robe, no sequins, no spotlight trick. Just denim jeans, a plain jacket, boots that hit the ground with a steady rhythm. The contrast was jarring. Where Seagal had bathed himself in spectacle, Chuck Norris stepped into the light like he'd walked in from a quiet street corner. That simplicity carried its own gravity. The cameras caught the first clear frame of his face and froze on it, broadcasting it onto every screen in the building and into millions of homes across the country. He didn't smile. He didn't wave. His expression was cold, carved from something older and harder than performance. People in the front rows covered their mouths, some crying without understanding why. Nostalgia wasn't just memory. It was hitting them in the chest, raw and unfiltered. As he walked, the crowd split again, but this time not in laughter. A wave of people rose to their feet, cheering, clapping, some whistling through tears. Others stayed frozen, unable to reconcile the man before them with the legend they'd carried in their heads for decades. It wasn't the same face from the old posters. It was lined now, heavier with time, but the eyes were steel. That was enough. Chuck didn't rush. Each step was deliberate, measured, unbothered by the roar shaking the arena. The slow rhythm of his boots became louder than the crowd, as if the sound engineers had pushed the gain up on nothing but his footfalls. That patience made Seagal's smirk falter for the first time. Seagal leaned against the ropes, trying to recover the stage. He spread his arms wide, calling for the crowd to look at him, not at the denim figure approaching. "This is what you came for? This?" His voice cracked slightly at the edges, swallowed by the avalanche of cheers. Chuck stopped at the foot of the ramp. He didn't climb in immediately. He stood there, still, letting the noise wash over him. The cameras zoomed tight. Lines etched into his face, the faint movement of his jaw, his eyes never leaving Seagal. When he finally moved, it wasn't for the crowd. He climbed the steps, one hand brushing the railing, boots thudding against the steel. The ropes parted as he stepped through, the arena lights snapping back on with brutal brightness. The two men now stood in the same box of white, the air between them thick with expectation. Seagal couldn't help himself. He pushed forward, mic still in hand. "You look tired, old man. You sure you don't want to sit down before this starts? Maybe tell one of your corny stories." The laugh he forced afterward sounded hollow. Chuck's first words cut through without a raised voice. "Your words are cheap. Let's see if you've got the spirit to back them." It wasn't shouted. It wasn't dressed up. Just flat, cold truth. The audience erupted like dynamite, half screamed in triumph, half in stunned disbelief that he'd broken his silence so brutally. Seagal's jaw tensed, the smirk twisting into something meaner, edged with real anger now. The difference between performance and conviction was suddenly visible. A camera caught the veins pulsing in Seagal's neck as he stepped closer, face inches from Chuck's. He muttered something off mic, and whatever it was, Chuck didn't blink. His stillness became its own weapon. The noise in the arena shifted. It wasn't just cheering anymore. It was something deeper, primal. The audience wasn't just watching a fight line up. They were watching pride itself step into the ring, stripped of costume. Chuck moved first, not with fists, but with presence. He stepped forward, closing the space until Seagal had to back away slightly. It wasn't force, it was inevitability. The cameras framed it perfectly. Seagal's swagger suddenly crowded by the unshakable calm of a man who didn't need to prove he existed. The crowd felt it too. For the first time since the insults began, they weren't divided. The energy bent toward Chuck, pulled by the gravity of his silence breaking. People who had laughed minutes earlier now found themselves quiet, waiting. Seagal tried to laugh it off again, but his voice was thinner, rushed. He gestured wildly, pointing at Chuck, spitting words that the mic barely caught. Washed up? Nothing left? But the audience didn't follow his rhythm this time. Their eyes stayed on Chuck. And Chuck, without another word, simply adjusted his jacket sleeve. A small, almost unconscious motion. But in the silence that followed, it landed like a threat. The cameras zoomed so close you could see the leather of his boot pressing into the mat, the faint shift of muscle in his jaw. He hadn't struck a blow, but the fight had already begun. The crowd felt it. They leaned forward, breath held, eyes burning. Then Seagal snapped, unable to hold back, his voice cracking into a shout. "You think silence makes you dangerous? I'll break you in front of every one of these fools." Chuck lifted his head, locked eyes with him, and the arena fell into that same crushing hush as before. He had no need to shout back. His stare was enough. The fight was no longer about fists. It was about who could make the other flinch first. And for the first time that night, Seagal's mask slipped. The two men stood almost chest to chest, and the noise of the arena thinned into something sharp and brittle. Thousands of people leaned forward, phones raised but forgotten, waiting for the first crack to appear between them. That waiting felt heavier than any punch. Seagal moved first. He always did. With a sudden flourish, he carved the air with wide arm movements, snapping his wrists and elbows as if the empty space were his opponent. He let out short, guttural grunts, then spun into a high kick, stopping inches from the ropes. The display was part martial, part theater, meant to rattle nerves. Some fans cheered at the speed and sharpness of it. Others jeered at the arrogance, their boos cutting through the flashes of cameras. The noise tangled above the ring, neither side winning, only building pressure. Chuck didn't move. His arms hung loose, his stance unshaken, his eyes fixed on Seagal without blinking. The stillness was worse than a counterattack. Each exaggerated strike Seagal threw into the air only made Chuck's calm look heavier, more immovable. The cameras caught his face. No rage, no smile, only a patience that gnawed at the man across from him. The silence grew louder. The crowd, once full of mocking laughter, began to hush between bursts of noise. The stillness wasn't respect. It was unease. Seagal could feel it slipping. His smirk faltered. He paced, bouncing on the balls of his feet, slapping his fists together, searching for momentum. He lashed the air again, faster now, a blur of hands striking nothing. The sweat starting to sheen on his forehead betrayed how much he was already burning. Then he lunged. A sudden rush, boots pounding canvas, his hands cutting down in a furious series aimed at Chuck's chest and head. The crowd screamed, expecting impact. But Chuck shifted only slightly, tilting his shoulder here, angling his head there, and Seagal hit nothing but air. The sound was strange, fists whipping through emptiness, sleeves cracking, the grunt of effort with no target. Microphones caught it all, louder than the crowd. The hollowness rang out like mockery. Gasps rippled through the stands. Seagal pressed harder, barking with every strike, his body jerking with effort. Chuck's movements barely registered, half steps, small leans, measured breaths. He didn't dodge like a man desperate to survive. He simply wasn't where the blows landed. Seagal's face flushed, his breathing ragged, his attacks turned sharper, more frantic. A final wild strike ripped through the air, his entire body behind it. He spun with the force of his own miss, stumbling a half step, regaining balance too late. The arena fell into silence. Chuck's eyes lifted, and he moved forward for the first time. Just one step, but it landed like a drumbeat. The boot against canvas echoed louder than any cheer. Seagal froze, chest heaving, his expression flickering between rage and doubt. The crowd erupted, half screaming, half holding their breath. Everyone felt it. The balance had shifted. "You're not even fighting!" Seagal shouted, voice cracking. The words bounced off the walls, desperate. Chuck waited. He let the noise swallow the outburst before he spoke. His voice came calm, steady. "You've already lost more than you realize." The arena detonated. Fans screamed, others cried, some simply stood in disbelief. Seagal's mask twisted, part fury, part panic, and he raised his fists higher, bouncing again, yelling curses drowned by the roar. But the audience's focus had shifted. They weren't laughing anymore. They weren't mocking. They were watching, waiting for Chuck to strike. The fight hadn't touched skin yet, but everyone knew. One side was already unraveling. Seagal circled, chest heaving, trying to pull the noise back under his control. His voice cut through the air, louder than before, strained at the edges. See? He's afraid to even lift a hand. The words ricocheted into the rafters, meant to wound, to frame Chuck's calm as cowardice. But the audience didn't buy it. A ripple of laughter spread, first scattered chuckles, then louder, rolling waves. They weren't laughing at Chuck. They were laughing at Seagal. His fury, his wide gestures, his desperate shouting looked like a child demanding attention. Cameras panned across the stands, fans clutching their stomachs in laughter, others shaking their heads, mouthing pathetic. The shift was clear. What had started as mockery of the absent legend had turned into mockery of the man flailing before them. Seagal's face reddened. He swung his arms harder, pacing with violent jerks, throwing phantom strikes into the air as if the audience itself were his opponent. "You think this silence is strength?" he bellowed. His voice cracked, and that only fueled more laughter. The sound gutted him. Chuck still hadn't spoken again. He stood with his arms relaxed, his breathing steady, eyes locked on Seagal like he was watching weather pass. That stillness carried a weight the cameras couldn't avoid. In the broadcast truck, a director whispered, "Stay tight on Chuck. Don't cut." It was the face of inevitability. Seagal lunged again, desperate to make the silence break. He hammered forward with his fists, heavy and wild, each strike punctuated by a barked grunt. Chuck leaned, stepped, shifted just enough to let them whistle by. His movements were so small they barely registered, until you realized Seagal hadn't landed a single touch. And then it happened. Chuck struck. It was nothing dramatic, no flourish, no roar. Just a short, precise movement, a quick snap of his fist, barely a full swing. The impact landed against Seagal's chest with a dull thump. Not a knockout blow, but enough. Seagal's balance snapped. His body jolted backward, his feet scrambling, one arm flailing to catch the rope. He stumbled, eyes wide, lips peeling back in shock. The sound of that small strike, magnified by microphones and silence, seemed to explode across the arena. The crowd detonated. People leapt to their feet, hands in the air, beer flying from plastic cups, phones swinging wildly to catch the moment. Screams cascaded down from the upper decks. A woman near ringside burst into tears, clutching her partner's arm as though she'd just witnessed something holy. Cameras cut to faces, mouths open in disbelief, fists pumping in triumph, children screaming with joy. The reaction was bigger than the strike itself, because it was the first, and because it proved the silence had been a choice. Chuck didn't follow up. He didn't press. He stepped back, calm, letting Seagal recover. The contrast was brutal. Seagal, chest heaving, eyes darting, stumbled into the ropes, screaming in rage, while Chuck stood still, breathing steady, his face unreadable. "Coward!" Seagal spat, though the word fell flat, drowned out by chants now swelling through the building. It wasn't boos anymore. It wasn't laughter. It was a roar of approval for Chuck. Seagal lunged again, screaming incoherently, throwing his arms wide in sweeping arcs, kicks coming without rhythm. His control had cracked. He moved with the speed of desperation, not discipline. The audience saw it, felt it. They began laughing, not with cruelty, but with certainty. He was unraveling before their eyes. Chuck let him flail. He shifted when he needed to, the rope behind him barely brushing his jacket as he sidestepped. The air filled with the sound of wasted effort, fists whipping empty space, boots slamming canvas. Every miss was louder than a hit would have been. The commentary team, Their voices, low and awed, spoke over the live feed. "He's lost his composure." Seagal's lost it completely. The crowd's laughter rose again, mixed with chants. "Chuck! Chuck! Chuck!" pounding the syllables like drumbeats. It was no longer a fight between two men. The arena itself had chosen sides. Seagal's screams echoed above the chants, but they carried no weight. His arms swung wider, his stance broke down, his rhythm fractured. He was attacking shadows now. And Chuck, still calm, still quiet, stepped lightly to the side, letting Seagal tear himself apart. Each movement Chuck made was measured, controlled, like punctuation marks in a sentence only he understood. For the first time, everyone in the building realized the truth. The physical battle hadn't even started, and Seagal was already losing. His anger had become a cage, his words knives turned against himself. He was fighting not just Chuck, but the laughter of thousands. And he was losing both. Seagal finally tightened into focus. The wild swings, the flailing anger, gone. His shoulders squared, his eyes narrowed, and the grin slid back onto his face, forced but deliberate. The crowd quieted into a low rumble. They knew this stance. Clips of it had circulated for years. His so-called signature. The throw he claimed could break a man in half. He feinted high, then snapped his hand down, locking onto Chuck's wrist. The grip drew a gasp. After all the dodging, the first real contact landed like a shockwave. Seagal yanked hard, dragging Chuck a fraction forward, hips already twisting for the finish. His whole body coiled into the motion, legs braced, shoulders cranking. The crowd shouted in unison, half believing this might be the end, half bracing to see how Chuck would answer. For a blink, it looked as if Seagal had him. Chuck's balance shifted, his shoulders dipping into the path laid out for him. The trap was set. Seagal turned, pivot sharp, ready to dump him hard into the mat. "Got him!" someone screamed from the lower rows, and the echo raced through the stands. But the angle betrayed him. Chuck didn't fight the pull. He let it deepen just enough, feeding Seagal's momentum past the breaking point. His elbow loosened, weight sliding along the line instead of against it. At the exact moment Seagal thought the throw was his, Chuck turned the current. A palm at the tricep, a small pivot of his hips, and the entire force reversed. Seagal's strength folded back onto him like a door slamming shut. The reversal looked effortless, water finding its level. Seagal's face flickered from triumph to shock. His body rose, not with power, but with betrayal of his own mechanics. The mat met him with a sound both heavy and final, a flat smack that cracked through the rafters. No replay could soften it. It was the noise of a body colliding with inevitability. The arena detonated. Fans leapt up, drinks spilling, phones shaking in hands that forgot to aim. Screams thundered down from the balconies. A chant of "Chuck! Chuck! Chuck!" rolled across the building, loud enough to rattle steel beams. On the big screen, the replay looped. Seagal's grip, Chuck's quiet shift, the sudden reversal, the thud. Over and over, the proof. Aggression without control becomes self-destruction. On the mat, Seagal twitched to rise, his palms pressed down, arms trembling. A nervous shiver shot through his shoulders, betraying fatigue and panic. He planted one knee, tried to push, but his hands shook so badly the climb stalled. The crowd's roar became a rhythm, cheer, hush, cheer again, rising and falling with his failed attempts. Chuck stepped closer, not with violence, not with showmanship. He simply stood over Seagal, boots planted, eyes steady. He didn't raise his fists. He didn't taunt. He waited. The waiting was worse than any strike. It framed Seagal's struggle in silence, turned the arena into a jury watching a man on trial. The microphones caught every small sound. Seagal's labored breathing, the squeak of his boots on canvas, the faint roll of dust shifting under lights. That silence pressed heavier than the earlier noise. The audience leaned in, holding their breath, unwilling to break it. Seagal forced himself upright again, teeth bared, veins thick on his neck. His chest rose fast, his fists lifted because habit told him they had to. But the crowd no longer feared him. They watched him wobble, watched sweat drip into his eyes, watched the tremor in his hands. On the giant screen above, the image magnified his weakness, showing it to him in real time. He saw himself seeing it, and the crowd saw that too. Chuck stayed motionless. His stillness became the weapon. He had already written the end of the fight, and everyone in the building could read it. The referee edged closer, one arm half raised. He could feel the fight tilting into conclusion, sense the building begging for a signal. But Chuck lifted a hand, a small gesture, calm and absolute. The message was clear. Not yet. Seagal, hunched and trembling, forced himself upright once more. His chest heaved like a furnace on the brink of collapse, but pride shoved his body forward. He staggered toward Chuck, fists half raised, eyes wild with a mix of fury and shame. The arena watched, 1,000 faces straining with anticipation, no one speaking, as though sound itself might tip him over. He swung. A slow, desperate punch, thrown more from will than muscle. Chuck's arm lifted almost lazily, redirecting the blow with the smallest turn of his wrist. Seagal stumbled past the block, legs tangling beneath him. The crowd gasped. Another attempt came, clumsy and wide. Chuck caught it with a simple parry, stepped in, and with a motion so clean it seemed gentle, guided Seagal down to the mat again. No violence, no flourish, just inevitability. Seagal hit the canvas with a muffled thud, this time slower, almost surrendering to gravity. The arena exploded. Cheers, sobs, chants, an avalanche of noise crashing from every direction. People rose as one, entire sections on their feet, hands raised, phones glowing like a field of stars. The chant was no longer fragmented. It was unanimous. Chuck! 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 On the mat, Seagal tried to rise again. His arms shook under him, but the strength was gone. He got as far as sitting upright, his back bent, sweat pouring from his face. His eyes avoided the cameras, avoided the screens. He was staring down at the floor, trapped in a silence heavier than the crowd's thunder. That silence came from inside him. Chuck didn't press. He stood a few feet away, posture relaxed, expression calm. He wasn't hunting victory. He was waiting for recognition. The referee hovered again, ready to call it, but Chuck shook his head once more. This wasn't about a referee's count. It wasn't about rules. It was about Seagal. The arena caught it. The cheers softened into a tense hush, thousands waiting, breaths held, as if watching a man choose between dignity and denial. The cameras zoomed on Seagal's face, twisted, exhausted, trembling. His lips moved around words that didn't come. He lifted one hand halfway, then let it drop. His body spoke what his pride couldn't. Still, in a final spark of defiance, Seagal lurched forward with one last wild swing. The motion was clumsy, almost pitiful. Chuck caught it with the ease of swatting dust from his sleeve, and with the same calm precision as before, laid him back down on the mat. This time, gently, teacher to student, not victor to victim. The crowd erupted again, a roar so thick it rattled in bones. People wept openly. Strangers hugged each other in the aisles. A chant began anew, not sharp but rolling, an anthem. Chuck Norris! Chuck Norris! Cameras cut from face to face. A teenager in tears, an older man saluting with trembling hands, a woman screaming with joy into her phone. Others simply stood still, staring at the ring as if unable to believe they had witnessed something real in a world of manufactured spectacle. The camera lingered on a child on his father's shoulders, eyes wide, mouth open, both hands clapping furiously. The moment had burned itself into memory. Chuck finally stepped forward, crouched slightly, and looked down at Seagal. His voice, calm and steady, carried through the microphone without needing volume. Loud words are always cheap. Real strength lives in silence. It cut through everything, the chants, the cheers, the sobs, and sank deep. The words weren't just for Seagal. They were for everyone who had doubted, everyone who had forgotten what strength without arrogance looked like. The arena rose into a standing ovation. The noise turned from frenzy to reverence, applause echoing like rolling thunder. The cameras caught it all. The shine of tears on faces, the fists raised in respect, the release of tension that had gripped the building since the first insult. Seagal sat, slumped, eyes fixed on the mat, shoulders sagging under the weight of humiliation, heavier than any punch. He didn't look up. He couldn't. His silence was the truest defeat of the night. Chuck didn't raise his arms in victory. He didn't pose or call for cheers. He simply turned, took a slow step toward the ropes, and let the crowd's roar carry him. Each footfall was steady, unhurried, as if he were walking back into the ordinary world, leaving the myth behind for the audience to hold. The final shot lingered. Chuck's back as he disappeared through the tunnel, the arena on its feet, thousands applauding, many crying. And in the ring, under the harsh lights, Seagal sat alone, eyes downcast, framed not by glory, but by silence. It was the silence that punished him most.